So first we need to add input events for sprinting and crouching. So you're going to want to go to your project settings. You can access it by going edit project settings, and then you go to input. Here we're going to expand our action mappings, and we're going to add 2 entries. I'm going to do crouch, which will be left control, and sprint, which will be left shift. Now we'll close out of that. We're also going to need to edit our enum for parkour movement modes. So go ahead and go into enums, open the parkour movement type, and we're going to add 2 more. And that's going to be crouch, sprint. Save that, close it. Now let's go ahead and create an animation for sprinting. So go into your first person folder, animations. Let's copy the run animation, and we'll call it first person sprint. Open it up. Now let's pause it, move this all the way to the beginning, grab the spine, and we'll set the local rotation Z to 27. So we're going to be going down a little bit, add a key, hit apply, and also go to asset details and set the rate scale to 1.5. Now let's save that, and now that should be a nice simple sprint animation that we can use for now. Now let's go ahead and open our first person animation blueprint. First thing, we're going to go into the event graph. Let's add a new variable for parkour movement mode. And we will search for our enum. We also need a variable for the parkour component, which we will cache on start. So this will be our parkour movement component. Now let's go ahead and get our begin play node. From here, we're going to use try get pawn owner. We're going to get a component by class, and this is going to be the parkour component. So basically what this is doing is getting the owner of the animation blueprint, and then we're going to find the component inside of that for parkour movement. And then we'll set our parkour movement component to that on the begin play. And to be safe, we can go ahead and add an is valid check for this. Now here in the update method, we're going to once again check to make sure that this is valid. And if it is, we're going to just set our parkour movement mode variable here that we have locally. So we're going to look for current parkour movement mode. Set that. Now let's go to our state machine. Here in the run method, we're going to add a blend poses by bool. Now, what we'll do here is check to see if our current movement mode equals sprint. If it doesn't, we're going to use our normal run animation, but if it does, we're going to use our new sprint animation. And now we're going to go back a level, and to make it work a little bit smoother, we're going to go ahead and add a link from our jump loop straight into run. That way we bypass the animation for landing if we are sprinting. So we're going to go ahead and do a check here. If this equals sprint, then we're going to go from jumping loop straight into the running animation, bypassing the landing animation, which will make it look a lot smoother. All right, now we're done with the animation side of things. We can close this. Let's go back to our first person blueprint really quick. First person character. We're going to open this up, go into our character movement. We got to make sure that can crouch is checked. And we also want to make sure that walk off ledges when crouching is checked. Now, this is optional. this is how it works in Titanfall. You can crouch and walk off of a ledge. By default, for some reason, it doesn't let you do that in Unreal, so you're going to want to make sure that's checked. Now, as you can see here, I made a space for crouching and sprinting, so let's go ahead and get our action events for that. It's going to be our crouch action event. We'll go right here. We're going to make our event in the Parkour component, and then we'll come back and plug it in. So here you go, our crouch and sprint events. We're going to leave this up and open our Parkour component. Now here we can go ahead and add our custom events for crouching, crouch slide event, and our sprint event. We'll compile this and just plug it in. Let's grab our Parkour component, plug these in. And we should be done with the first person character. So go back to the Parkour movement. Let's go ahead and first make our functions for sprinting, sliding, and crouching. So let's do sprint start. We'll do sprint end, crouch start, crouch end, slide start, slide end. I'll make it a little bit easier to go over this, so let's start on sprint start. Now the first thing we're going to do here is call crouch end and slide end. Now let's make sure that we can sprint. We're going to make sure that we're walking and that our current parkour mode is set to none. So let's grab the current parkour mode, verify that it's set to none, and also make sure that our character is walking. And we can collapse this to a macro. Can sprint. So if we can sprint, we'll go ahead and set our parkour mode to sprint. And if it was changed, meaning it's wasn't sprint before and it got changed, we're going to go ahead and set our max walk speed on the character movement. And we'll set this to 1000. Now you can also right click, promote to variable, call it sprint speed. That way you can change it later. Now after this, we're going to have to do, just like we did before, we're going to open our sprint gate. And what the gate's going to do is check to make sure that we're still holding forward. If we're not, then it's going to stop sprinting. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let's go back to our event graph. I'm going to add 2 more pins here. So here, let's make a gate. And we'll have a custom event for opening the gate. And a custom event for closing the gate. Let's collapse this. And we can make the input go straight into the enter node. Now with this, we can add a sprint update function here. And what we're going to do here is make sure that the player is still holding forward. So first, let's check to make sure that they are sprinting. And if they are, we're going to make sure that they're holding forward. Now to do that, we're going to go ahead and grab our forward input macro and check to make sure that it is greater than 0. And if it's not, we're going to call sprint end. and end our sprint. Now while we're here, let's go ahead and do our sprint end. All this is going to do is set our parkour mode back to default. Let's check our parkour movement mode. Make sure that we're set to sprint. And if we are, we're going to go ahead and set our parkour movement mode to none. If it was changed, we will close the sprint gate. Now we're also going to want to open the sprint gate after this, after some time. So we're going to do set timer by function name. And this will be open sprint gate. And we'll set this to 0.1. Now let's go back to our sprint start method, and we're going to call open sprint gate here. And that should be about it for the sprint start. Now what this will do is just set our max walk speed to our new speed. And then later on, we'll reset this once sprinting is no longer occurring. All right, now I'm back on the event graph. We're going to go ahead and call our sprint start from here. Next, let's work on crouching and sliding. So the first thing we're going to do is check to see if we're like on a ledge or anything like that, because all we're going to do then, if we hit crouch, all we're going to do is just drop off. We're not actually going to do a crouch or a slide. So let's check this. And we're going to check if we're mantling. Check if we're on a ledge. And we're going to check if we are vertically wall running. Let's go ahead and collapse this too. Collapse nodes. And this will be parkour cancel. Now in here, let's add an execute input with a branch. Now we're going to check to see if we're in any of these states. And if we are, then we're just going to call vertical wall run end with a decent length for the reset time. Now if we're not, we're going to check wall running. And we should have a wall running macro here. And if we are wall running, we're just going to call wall run end. Again, with a pretty decent time on that, half a second. Now for the output, we'll grab this and we'll make one execution node here, which is just clear, meaning that none of these cases have been hit. So we're clear to move forward. Basically, if any of these, forgot to add this, make sure all three ORs are in here. But yeah, if basically any of these are hit, we're not going to proceed with the crouch or slide. But if they aren't, we're going to go right through and we're going to clear. So now we can plug this in here. We hit crouch and we're doing wall running or anything, it'll cancel them. But if we aren't, we'll proceed forward. All right, next let's check to make sure that we can slide. We're going to once again check our forward input. We're going to make sure that it's over 0. I'm going to collapse this into a macro and call it can slide. So in here, we basically want to make sure that we are holding forward and we are sprinting. So let's get our current parkour movement mode and check to see if we are sprinting. Now, not only are we going to check if we are sprinting, but we're also going to check a new variable. Let's make a new variable called sprint queued. So what this basically means is that there's a sprint in the queue, and as soon as we land, we'll go ahead and immediately sprint. We're going to set that up later, but let's just plug that in for now. So either we're sprinting or we're queued for a sprint. So if we're holding forward and we're sprinting or we're ready to sprint, then we will be able to slide. So let's go back to the event graph, plug that in. Now if we can't slide, we're going to go ahead and crouch. So let's get our current parkour movement mode. And we're going to switch on this. So if the current parkour movement mode is none, we're going to do crouch start. If we're already crouching, then we'll do crouch end. We can also collapse this, and this will just be crouch toggle. Now next, we're going to check to see if we're walking. So let's grab our character movement component. And we're going to check to see if we're walking. If we are walking, we can slide right away. We'll call slide start. So if we're not walking, we'll go ahead and queue a slide, meaning that once we do begin walking, we will slide immediately. So let's make another variable for that. And this time it'll be slide queued. And we'll set that to true. Let's work on crouch first since it's simpler. We'll go to our crouch start. First, we're going to make sure that our parkour mode is set to none. So let's get our parkour mode. Make sure it's set to none. Then we can go ahead and grab our character and call crouch. And we can also set our parkour movement mode to crouch. Lastly, we're going to want to set our new variables to false for sprint queued and slide queued. We're going to want to do this for the sprint event too, as well as a slide event. Compile that. Now let's copy everything here besides this. And let's go to our crouch end method. And what we're doing is basically the opposite. So we're going to check to see if our parkour mode is set to crouch. And if it is, we're going to uncrouch. Then we're going to set our parkour mode to none. And we're also going to set these to false. So now that crouch is done, let's go back to our event graph and let's get started on the slide start. Now here, let's make a branch and we're going to check to make sure that we can slide. So we're going to add an and node here. We're going to check can slide. And we're also going to make sure to see that we are walking. So we're going to get our character movement component and make sure that we're walking. Now we're going to end our sprint. Then we're going to set our parkour movement mode. We're going to set it to slide. And like I said before, we're going to make our character crouch. That's going to lower our capsule so that we can slide under things. We're also going to get our character movement components so that we can set some properties on there. First, we're going to set our ground friction. We're going to set that to 0. And then we're going to set our braking deceleration. Walking, we're going to set that to 1400, which is quite a bit lower than the default. We also want to set our max walk speed while crouching to 0. This will stop the player from moving while they're sliding. Now to lock the movement of the slide in a straight line, we're going to want to lock the plane of movement. So we're going to call set plane constraint from vectors. Now our forward vector is going to be our velocity normalized, and the up is just going to be our actor up. So let's do up first. Let's get our character and get actor up. And our velocity is just going to be taken from our character movement. And we can normalize this. And we'll collapse this as well. Just call it velocity normal. We'll plug that into forward. So now, as soon as we hit slide, there's no way we can move, left or right while we're sliding. We're going to be locked in that forward movement and continue the slide. So that way we can aim the camera around and shoot around while we're sliding. Of course, we also need to enable this. So let's call set plane constraint enabled. Set that to true. And we need to plug in the character movement component. So let's grab that. Plug that in here and here. Now the last step is moving the character forward along a slide vector. So like we said before, we're going to calculate that based on the normal of the ground and the right vector of the player. We're going to get the cross product of those two vectors to get the slide vector. So let's do a new line trace by channel. The start point is going to be our character actor location. And then the endpoint is going to be just below us. So we're going to add this to a new vector here. We're going to get our character's up vector, multiply it by -200. So we will shoot this raycast down and find the floor beneath us. And before we go forward, let's go ahead and collapse this. This will be get slide vector. Let's go back into here. And now on our out hit, let's go ahead and split this. We're going to get an out hit impact point, cross product of that, and our actor right vector. So we're going to get our character and get the actor right vector. So the cross product of this will actually return the opposite of the slide vector. So we're going to need to negate that. So we'll multiply it by -1. So we can plug this into the output as well as our return value. And we should have our slide vector. So now we can use this slide vector to add an impulse to our character to push them forward a bit. We don't want to do this if we are going uphill, so let's break this vector. We're going to check our Z value and make sure that it's the ground is almost flat. So we'll do a little tolerance on it. Now we'll create a branch here. And if we are going almost flat, we're going to add an impulse. So let's grab our character movement and add impulse. Now we can grab our slide vector and multiply it. Promote this to a variable and call it slide impulse amount. And we'll plug this in here. Now let's compile and set it to 600. We also want to check velocity change so that the mass of our character is taken into account. Now, just like with sprint, we're going to make a slide gate that basically checks to see that we're still moving in some way while sliding. If not, it'll stop the slide and transition into a crouch. So let's leave this here for now. Let's go back to our event graph. Plug this in here, and we'll do a new collapsed graph for sliding. So let's add a new gate. Let's collapse this. This will be slide. Now from here, plug the enter into the input. And just like before, let's create our custom events for slide gate open and close. Now here, let's make a new function called slide update. And we can plug that into here to our exit. And in here, we're going to check to see that our velocity is above a certain value. So first, let's check to make sure that we are sliding. So let's get our current parkour mode and verify that we are sliding. We are sliding. We're going to check our velocity on our character movement. And we'll check the length of this vector. Now, if it's less than or equal to, say, 35, then we will stop sliding. Now, in slide end, we're going to pass in a variable called crouch. So here we're going to set this to true. That way we transition from slide straight into crouch. Let's go ahead and set this up now while we're here. Again, we're going to make sure that we are sliding. So grab the current parkour mode. Make sure we are sliding. We're going to set the parkour movement mode. We can do a select statement here. And here the index will be crouch. So if we are wanting to crouch, we'll set it to crouch. If not, we'll set it to none. And if we were able to change, we're going to close the slide gate. Now we can hit compile, and now we can check our crouch local variable. And if it's set to false, we will uncrouch our character. So let's grab our character and uncrouch. So since we crouched our character while sliding, we will uncrouch them here. Now let's go ahead and go back to our slide start to finish that up. From here, we're going to open the slide gate. And we're going to make sure to set sprint queued and slide queued to false. And before I forget, let's grab these and do the same thing for sprint start. So at the end of sprint start, we will clear out the queues. So let's go back to our event graph and plug in the slide node. Now from here, let's go to our initialize graph. We're going to add a few more variables here that we're going to save to reset later. So let's grab our character movement component, and we're going to get our ground friction. Promote this to a variable, and this will be our default ground friction. So we can plug this in. We also need to get our braking deceleration. And we can promote this to a variable. This will be default braking deceleration. Now, last two things are going to be max walk speed and max crouch speed. Default walk speed and default crouch speed. And these are just here so that we can reset them back later. So now let's go back to our event graph and go into our reset movement function. So since crouch is going to be another valid default state, we're going to grab this and set it to or here. So either way, it'll go ahead and reset all the values to default. We're already setting our default gravity. We just need to set everything else. Let's grab our ground friction, braking deceleration, walk speed, and crouch speed. So we'll do set ground friction, set it here. We'll do set braking deceleration for walking, set that. We'll also set our walk speed to this, and we will set our walk speed crouch to this. So let's just plug these in. We'll clean this up a little bit. So now we went ahead and set our default gravity back, as well as our ground friction, braking deceleration, walk speed, and crouch speed. So they will all be reset to normal. Now let's make sure we disable our plane constraint. Let's grab our character movement, and we'll set our plane constraint enabled to false. And we're actually going to move this after the set plane constraint enabled call. So now we have some new values here. So we need to set our crouch to walking and our sprint to walking as well. And we're going to set none to walking too. Now while we're sprinting, we're going to want a faster wall run speed. So let's go to our wall run update, and then we'll go to our wall run movement. And here where the wall run speed is plugged in, we're going to unplug it. We're going to do a select statement here. And if sprint is queued, then we're going to move a bit faster. So if sprint is not queued, we're going to use our normal speed. But if it is queued, we're going to move faster. So let's promote this to a variable, compile, and we'll set this to 1100. We'll call it wall run sprint speed. Now let's go back to the event graph, and let's go ahead and grab these and collapse this to a function. So we'll call this end events. Now in here, we're also going to call sprint end and slide end. Now let's go back and let's go to our open gates. So this is what's called if we're walking and then suddenly we start falling. What we're going to do is we have to preserve our sprint. So this is where the queue system comes in handy. Let's make a new function called sprint jump. Now this is essentially going to do the same thing as sprint end, but it's also going to set the sprint queue to true. So let's make sure that we are sprinting. Do a branch here. We're going to check our current parkour mode. Make sure we're sprinting. And if we are, we'll call sprint end. And we're also going to set sprint queued to true. Let's go back to our open gates collapse node, and we'll call sprint jump here to preserve our sprint. We'll also call end events, and we'll call open gates, and we can go to our output. Now on the flip side, if we were falling and then we walk, we start landing, for some reason on the land event, we can't actually use that reliably. The character will still be falling technically on the frame of the land. So instead we're going to use this. We're going to make sure that we are in the falling state. So let's grab this and we're going to flip it around. So if the previous movement mode was falling and the current one is walking, then we're going to check our queues. So let's do a branch here. If it's set to true, we'll do our check queue. Not, we'll just go straight to the output. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let's go back to the event graph and set up our queue system. So let's do a new custom event called check queues. Before I forget, let's go back and go ahead and call it from here. So in here, it's very simple. We're going to make a branch. We're going to check if slide is queued. And if it is, we'll call slide start. If not, we're going to check sprint queued. And if it's true, we'll call sprint start. And both of these, after they perform their actions, they'll set both queues to false, as you can see here. So what this will do is, as soon as you land, if either of these are set to true, it'll either slide or sprint. Now let's go up here to our sprint gate and finish this up. So let's go ahead and plug in our sprint update, and that should be good. Go back to our event graph. Let's make sure to move our camera tick below the sprint and slide so that it happens last. And then we'll go into here and update these. So for crouch, we're going to set our camera to 0. For sprint, we'll also set it to 0. So we don't want roll for the crouch or sprint. And then for slide, we want it to -15. Now we want to update the open gates function itself and add our new gates. And make sure you have the open wall run gate and open vertical wall run gate there. And let's go ahead and add the slide and sprint open gates. Let's go ahead and rename these, keep it consistent. So open slide gate, close slide gate. So here, and then we're going to open the sprint gate as well. So now all of our gates open. Let's go back to the event graph. Now let's collapse these jump events into one jump event. So let's do collapse the function, jump events. Let's go in here. Let's make 2 new functions. So slide jump. First, we're going to check to see our parkour mode, make sure that we are sliding. And if we are, we'll go ahead and call slide end. And we'll do the same thing here after we add this. We'll do the same thing for crouch. So crouch jump. We'll make a branch. Make sure that we are crouching. And if we are, we'll call crouch end. Let's go back here, plug that in too. And we already made sprint jump, so we can plug that in as well. Go back to the event graph. So now we've added our jump events and our new open gates. So that should all work. So let's try it now. Whoa. So I found the mistake. You're going to want to go into your slide start function, open up the get slide vector node, and then this is the problem. So we don't want the out hit impact point. We want to impact normal. So let's give that a shot. There you go. Much better. Back in the event graph, let's do like what we did for jump events. Let's grab these 2 and collapse them to a function called close gates. Now in here, we'll call close slide gate and close sprint gate. A few more corrections here. Let's go into our sprint start function, and we're not going to do 2 sprint queues in a row. It's actually one of them is going to be a slide queue. Same thing for the slide start. Let's go into here and change one of these to a slide cue. Another thing we want to do is go into our vertical wall run end event. And right here, we want to call another timer by function name. And this time it's going to be for check cues. Now what this is going to do is it's going to allow you to sprint right after mantling without having to hit sprint again. Basically, if you're already sprinting and you come out of a wall run or a wall climb, it will automatically sprint again. So now you should have fully functional sprinting, sliding, and crouching. Now the slide also works going downhill. It won't boost you off, and it'll also end in a crouch once you're done, just like Titanfall. The cue system should also be working, so if you are sprinting and you jump, you'll start sprinting again right as you land, and you can even jump and hit crouch in the air, and it'll remember that and slide.